Hey guys, Tom here. Before we dive into this episode, I just want to tell you about a few awesome free resources we have available for anyone watching this video. Firstly, if you head over to my website, thomasbrettmixing.com, you can download a free 70-page ebook I've put together called Mixing Simplified. Within this book, you'll find tons of tips, tricks, and advice on how you can go about achieving great sounding mixes in the simplest, most easy to understand way possible. You should get a pop-up asking if you'd like to download the PDF when you first arrive on the website. But if you don't, you can also find links at the bottom of every page or on the store section of the website. Aside from the free ebook, if you head over to the blogs section of the website, you'll also find a huge collection of educational articles that I've written over the years for top audio education platforms like the Pro Audio Files, Unstoppable Recording Machine, and Joey Sturgis Tones. One final thing before we get on with the video. In the very near future, me and Max are planning to do some video segments where we review your music. If you'd like us to potentially take a listen to one of your tracks and give you some fairly in-depth feedback and advice on what you can do to improve the mix, recording, songwriting, structure, or pretty much whatever we hear in the track, feel free to submit a link to your song using the Contact Us page of the website, along with your contact details. Every now and then, we'll pick out a few random submissions to include in our upcoming videos. Anyway, let's get back to the podcast. Hey Max, how you doing?
Hey Tom, doing great. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Had a good week. Let's dive into this episode. Today, I think we're going to be talking about mastering because I know it's a topic that you're very interested in. So just quickly, for anyone who's new to the podcast, this is Unscripted, our podcast, our chat show where me, myself, Thomas Brett, and my good friend / pro mixer, legendary producer, Max Morton, talk about anything music production, mixing, recording, mastering, whatever we want to. And as I say, today we're going to be diving into mastering. So I'll just kick us off by talking a little bit about my experience with you to do with mastering. For people who don't know, Max is very good at mastering as well. I've got you to master tons of my songs. We've done lots of stem mastering. So, and also, I know I'm rambling on a little bit here, but I also remember you kind of really helped me with some barriers I had to do with mastering in my mind of like, you know, a lot of people, they have like, oh, how loud should I master? Always aiming for a certain RMS or LUFS or whatever. And a couple times I asked you and you said you just master as loud as you think the song needs to be mastered, basically. So you don't care if it ends up stupidly loud as long as it sounds good, or you don't care if it ends up quieter if it sounds good. You're just aiming for what sounds best. So sorry for rambling on a bit there, but basically all I'm saying is Max is a very good mastering engineer. So I'm very interested to talk with you about mastering. Where do you want to start?
Well, first off, so many kind words. I feel a little bit like as if I do not really deserve that because I'm not positioning myself as a dedicated mastering engineer. But that's mostly because I don't think that mastering is that mastering deserves to be that dark art in the modern day.
It's not as separate of a thing as people make it. It's just mixing at a smaller level, you know, like.
Exactly, especially if you're dealing with stem mastering. Stem mastering is when the client delivers you drums separately, bass separately, guitar separately, synth separately, and vocals. And in fact, you're almost mixing. You just have more control and you probably have more of a big picture and some sort of like mix engineer's absolute hearing, so to say. And by that I mean like in musical theory, absolute hearing is when you can guess the note by just hearing the note, which I cannot do. And you cannot really study that unless you're a little child. As far as I know, in the early childhood you can. But later in life, you cannot. So you can have perfect relative pitch, which I actually do, but you cannot have perfect pitch if you haven't had it in your childhood. Same thing, but you can learn it with frequencies and dynamics and balances in terms of mastering. And that is even easier because every song needs slightly different frequency balances and frequency curves, and it doesn't mean that you need always to have that amount of treble, that amount of high mids, that amount of low end. it really depends on the arrangement and the mood of the song and the vibe and the loudness you're aiming for. And the loudness you're aiming for is depends on what kind of transients you want, what kind of low-end dynamics you want, what kind of mood of the song you want. Do you want it to breathe, or do you want it to hit you in the face, like, against the brick wall? It really depends on your artistic vision as the engineer. And in this case, the good engineer is a musician. His musical instrument is his processing tools, like plugins and everything, and the DAW. So, long story short, I think that mastering these days is more of the same process as mixing. You're almost using the same tools. Back in the day, mastering engineer was a person who understood the technical aspects of delivering the mixed material to the plant, to the pressing plant. So the old school mastering engineer was a totally different. It didn't really have anything to do with making songs loud and bright. The way people think of mastering these days. The great freedom in mastering comes from understanding that, you know what, screw loudness war. I love mastering loud, but I had that problem for years and years. I just came to realize that no one ever notices if your song is 1 dB quieter than another song, unless they just do that hardcore comparison. Some of those obsessive clients who just want to sound like a certain band, and they have no idea that there are a million different ways to sound, so to say. So the amount of mid-range in Lamb of God will be different from Slipknot, and will be obviously different from Bad Omen or from Killswitch Engage or from any other band, right? Because they don't care. They don't reference all the time to someone else because they have that sort of absolute engineer's hearing that lets them understand, okay, that's enough mid, that's huge low end, I don't want to go any further. That creates the impression of huge low end for me. And that's why some of the beginner guitarists, let's say, they boost the low end too much or they boost the gain too much. That's a very, very popular problem with bass players, in the band. They just boost the low end all way up, and they think that way their bass will translate, which is the quite opposite. You have to roll off the low end and make that bass a little bit louder then, and maybe compress a little bit, but that way it will reveal the mid-range nicely, it will reveal the treble of the bass, and you will hear the instrument properly. Same with mastering. So, again, it looks like we're not talking directly about mastering, but that's the thing. Mastering isn't that kind of a dark art that is separate from the rest of the production these days. And if you have a great band or a great material, great song, like, again, you said a lot of good things about me, it's my turn to say good things about you. When Thomas sends me the songs to Stam Master, and he does that a lot of that all the time. I'm getting the songs that I almost feel like cheating because I don't have to do much. I'm just doing little moves. And that's what the mastering engineer has to do.
Well, you say that, but as I say, I always say to you, I send you my stems that have, because I'm a mix engineer, there are always things that I like to do myself. I have certain tastes in reverb, in maybe delays, and whatever, certain things I'll do. But I always want someone who I believe has better ears than me, you, to put the final stamp so that it's not my responsibility. So if anyone says it sucks, I can blame you, A lot of the time when I send you stuff, I always say, oh, I love how tight it sounds, for example. I say I love the tightness of the kick and the low end, and also the width. A lot of the time, I hear when I listen on my speakers or whatever to something that I've essentially mixed, and then you've stem mastered or mastered for me. The main thing I'll hear is, oh, it's super tight, it's super defined. The kick and the bass are nice and central. Everything in the left and right are very clear and pristine, and I can hear the separation between the sides and the middle, which is what I like. I like to hear that separation. But there's a big thing that you're adding there to the whole process, which is, as I say, first of all, you're taking responsibility off of my hands so I can focus on what I do best, or what I think I do best, which is production and basic mixing. And also, even like, I'm not the biggest fan of mixing stuff. I'm okay with mixing other people's stuff. I'm not a huge fan of mixing my own stuff. So it takes that kind of roof off of my head where I'm scared to do things. You know, like if I've heard the same song that I've been working on for a long time, mixing becomes extremely difficult. But if I know that I'm not the person who's having to do the final approval, let's say, the final stamp of this is the final master, this is the way this song will sound, then I become more free to do stuff and more free to potentially screw things up, because I always have that barrier of, oh, if I do screw anything up, Max will fix it for me. And for me, that's the part of mastering. And that's why I kind of prefer stem mastering to just regular mastering as well.
Exactly.
So,
yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about, because I actually hate just mastering.
Oh, really?
Because, yeah, without stems, to me, there is not much you can do if the mix is bad.
It's quite limited, yeah.
And if the mix is good, it almost feels like cheating. I mean, hey, just throw a maximizer and add a dB of high end and maybe just, a low end, a multiband on the low end with slow-ish attack, and just make sure that it only bounces with the kick, but it doesn't touch the bass. And that's one of the tricks of that tighter low end. I think we need at least one tip and trick for like an hour video.
Yeah. No, we can talk a little bit about the tips and tricks as well. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So for the tightness, what I like to do, and I prefer that on the master bus, but still I like having stems hitting that master bus. I usually use a very steep high-pass filter on the kick, something like 48 dB per octave. Mm-hmm. That reduces the amplitude of the low end without really taking too much of what we can hear. So it's around 35 hertz.
Oh, wow.
And usually our systems do not really reproduce anything below 35 hertz.
Yeah, for years, I always did 36 hertz. So very close to you.
Yeah.
Although slightly less steep.
With faster metal, I go up to 45. So if it's acoustic metal kick, or if it's even with super fast metal, I can go up to 50 hertz. But what I do next, I take something like Waves R bass, the subharmonic frequency generator.
Yep.
And I just add a little bit of that, maybe minus 20 dB. So I make the low end bigger, but I reduce the amplitude of the low end. So
you're putting the high pass filter at the very start of your mastering chain?
I put that high pass filter usually on the kick stem, on the drum stem, or on the kick stem.
Okay.
I prefer that. If I don't have that, if I only have a stereo track to master, I will listen to that low end, and I will also watch on the amplitude of the signal, and I will apply the high-pass filter, and I will see how it affects. Because with some tracks, if they already have the high passing there, it doesn't really affect the amplitude of the signal. But if I can take some of the unnecessary energy, I would probably save a little bit of the headroom, and that way I would be able to master a little louder or a little clearer. And I could also reinforce that low end later. I can add something like, again, R bass or max bass or infinity bass, I guess, from Slate. It's also cool. Or bass mint. So I have a few of them, and I just experiment with what sounded best. Usually for me, it's R bass. And I'm very careful with adding that to the master bus, because you have bass there, you have floor tom there, and they all might introduce some sort of unexpected trouble, right? But when I have stems, it's easier. And then when it comes to width, I only widen the elements of the mix, the stems. We're talking only about the stems now. I widen the stems that are already, well, if they start sounding a little phasey or undefined, it won't be a problem. So if I have a pad and backing vocals and a stereo guitar, I would only widen the pad and it will make things subjectively wider, but there will be still a lot of information in between that super unreal wide pad and the center material like vocals, kick, and snare. So when you're widening, make sure that there are narrow elements and wide elements, and that those wide elements will trick your brain into thinking that everything is super wide.
Yeah.
While you have still lots of stuff going on in the natural range of panorama. And that's why I don't like just mastering, because you can do nothing of that with just mastering. The only reason to do regular mastering for me is restoration. And I did quite a lot of that. So when you have like a 90s or even late 80s release of some band, and I had such experiences, maybe, brought to digital from some tape, maybe even cassette tape. Like, there is a lot of stuff you can do with that, but that's already more of a technical side of things, and that's what mastering is all about, actually, in the classic understanding of that word. Especially if you have different sources. Like you have one album, but you have 1/3 of the album taken from a cassette, another third taken from the master tape, and another third taken from another cassette. And you gotta make sure it sounds coherent. It doesn't drift. It's not too noisy, but still you cannot actually turn it into a modern sound in recording. There's only that as much as, very limited amount of things you can do with that recording.
Yeah.
You can obviously sound it more coherent, better, but that's restoration. When the band wants me to turn their amateur mix into a commercial sounding master, it's
you can't
impossible.
Do that just with mastering,
That's not what mastering is about.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. So in terms of like high passing, for example, will you get then high pass? Will you also high pass the bass and high pass everything? Like, because a lot of mastering engineers, like a lot of time when I'm just doing pure mastering, I will do like a high pass filter that's say at like 35 or 36 hertz.
You gotta keep in mind that if that music will be blasted through a car stereo with a subwoofer and it's not tuned right, and the person has that low-end boost for whatever reason, I have no idea, because I never listen to any kind of music like that, because it makes no sense, unless it's some drum and bass or dance music when you only have that fourth pulsating kick, that maybe you just want to enjoy that physical sensation. But in that case, why do you need vocals? So I'm trying to high pass the kick drum all the time, but with bass, returning to your question, it depends on the bass. Some bass has to be lower than the kick. Some bass has to be higher than the kick. I usually prefer to have the kick resonant frequency, so I know that the harmonic of the kick might be higher, but I like setting my R bass at around 40 hertz, maybe 45 hertz. And when I'm boosting the low end with on the bass with R bass, I like 60-ish, 50-ish. I don't care about the notes, because especially in rock music, it will be all over the place.
Yeah,
bass is playing complex
you won't hear
lines.
It defined anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, and I might be using with stem mastering and with mixing, I might be using a multi-band compressor on the bass itself after the R bass. So I make sure that the low end is super steady.
Yeah. So you're just compressing the low end there. Yeah, I do that.
Yeah, and I will do that on bass always, and then I will do that on the master bus. But on the master bus, it will be a source. It will be the tool of control.
Yeah.
So the multi-band compressor on the master bus for me is another way to make sure that the quality test has been passed. So and that's also on all my mix projects on the master bus, because when I'm mixing, I'm also mastering. That's one thing for me. I never do that separately. What I make sure is that the master bus multiband compressor only reacts to the kick drum. So it's everything below, let's say, 120 hertz, and it probably reacts, it takes away maximum 2 dB, and it only pulses with the kick. But when it lands right on the bass. If I just move the threshold a bit lower, it starts reacting to the bass. Then I get it back to the point where the bass doesn't let the compressor needle move. And then when the kick hits, it starts pulsating.
Yeah.
That way I'm sure that I have that proper movement in the low end. And it's a healthy movement. If that movement is above 3 dB, let's say, it means that my kick is way too bassy compared to the bass. If the bass reacts together with the kick, it means that there will be no pulsation, just one single in the subwoofer, right? We need that healthy pulsation there. And then, if there is too much low end, you will just be unable to master it loud enough.
Yeah.
Because you will distort the maximizer and or the clipper you're using to raise the volume. So those two tools ensure that my low end is dynamic enough, and they ensure that there is enough low end, just enough low end before the maximizer starts sounding weird, too pumpy, too distorted, and so on. Everything else is a matter of taste.
Well, there are certain techniques like that which may sound like fairy nonsense, where you're just like looking at the meter for certain things, but there are certain things like that do.
I have a slightly different treatment with master bus compression. I usually use the classic slow attack 4-to-1 SSL style. Usually it's a slate gray.
Yep.
But my high pass is set at around 100 hertz. And what I've noticed is that it works more as almost as an auto release, which means it usually eats away something like 1.5-2 dB when the vocals are not there. But as soon as the lead vocals or guitar solo kicks in, when you have that high pass enabled, it reacts more to the vocals, and it almost works like a very stealthy leveler, together with boosting all those transients, together with making the drums more snappy in a nice way. It levels the mix a little bit to the vocals. So when the vocals kick in, you have like 1 dB less of everything. And when the vocals stop, you have slightly louder. And you cannot really hear it, but I've noticed that it's easier for me to get that. Also, it brings up the transients better without unnecessary glue, because I don't like hearing that compressor too much. So it's very rarely when I'm using something without a high pass, but that's my personal taste. It's like some mixers somehow make it possible to mix with super fast attack. I tried, because they achieve amazing results. Somehow they have that huge drum sounds, and it doesn't sound compressed. Like, it sounds compressed, but it doesn't sound compressed in a bad way.
Yeah.
No matter how often I tried, and I tried even copying their workflow. I'm talking about Nolly, of course.
I think we talked about this before, and I said, like,
how does he do? I have no idea. Maybe that's because of the drum samples he prefers. I think super snappy.
I
don't know.
From back in the day when I was studying Nolly a lot and his way of doing things, and obviously his drum sounds are the thing that everyone. I mean, everything in his mixes sounds good, but the drum sounds are what he's famous for, So the thing is with Nolly, if you're boosting, he uses a lot of like SSL channel compression and stuff on like kick shells, snares, toms, whatever. And I can't remember which one it was, one of his courses or his Nail the Mix or something. I think he was like compressing his kick like 9 dB, something like that, 9 dB, or snare 9 dB. And if you have the slow attack, like 4-to-1 slow attack, fast release on like an SSL compressor, 9 dB on like a snare or a kick, you're going to get a huge transient, very, very sharp, very snappy. So if you're doing that on the individual channels and then you're mixing into a bus compressor with a really slow attack, that will balance it out. So it's just, it's the opposite way of doing things to how we do things, you know?
Yeah, you got to have a great drummer for that, right? Or a great sample drum kit. And that brings us back to mastering, because it's good to have all that freedom of choosing, okay, I'll use this approach, that approach when you're a mixer, because you can roll back to the tracks, to the individual tracks or groups and do things there.
Yeah.
But when you have a master project, you just got to master someone else's mix. Even if it stems, usually what you're choosing depends on someone else's material.
Yeah.
So you cannot really apply the exact same master compressor if you have the drums that need a lot of healing. So let's say you have a drum stem and you realize that, okay, the snare won't be punchy. I have to do something first before I even get a healthy snare transient. Or the opposite, they tried some crazy compression and that compression has to be tamed somehow, and you got to choose a combination of a clipper and a transient shaper and a compressor, and then you got to choose a specific maximizer. So when you are thinking mastering, you got to probably have a selection of maximizers to choose from by knowing how they sound, and there are a few of them I really like. I'm the Ozone guy. I know so many people love Pro L2, and I love Pro L2 in certain applications, but it's a little bit less snappy for me. So when working with R&B-ish, pop-ish stuff like your stuff also, I often use Pro L because it can go as loud as you want, and it will only affect the snare snappiness and the transients, while Ozone gives you those super crisp modes. Like it has a crisp mode that is perfect if you are not mixing something super low and heavy. It can be so pristine as if you're not mastering at all. It can be as pristine as a clipper. It's a little dangerous though, so you got to control the low end because some excessive tom bomb will probably distort. Then it has the modern setting, Ozone modern setting, which sounds a little closer to Pro L2, but still a little snappier. And I love using that when I feel like, especially when the band says, after I send them the first mix and master, or just the first master, they say, hey, the drums are a little bit too upfront. We'd love to have a little less of the snare. Then I'd probably just switch to another maximizer mode or even another maximizer, and they will love it. So you got to know your maximizers. There's also a cool one, invisible limiter. Some people use that. I haven't been using it for ages, but it has its own sound to it, and you have all the right to choose a specific limiter to your task. There's also Slate FGX, which is I'm only using it when I need some of its tools, but I'm not using the loudness section of it. So you gotta always know what you're using, and you will you need a selection of tools because you will deal with entirely different situations as a mastering engineer. As a mixer, what you're dealing with on the mastering stage is your own doing. Is your own responsibility when you're mastering. And even if you can provide feedback, if you can say, hey guys, could you please raise the snare like 3 dB and also maybe cut out 150 Hz from the bass, and that will probably solve half of your problems. It's still nothing compared to what you can do as a mixer. That's why it's important to have an array of compressors, an array of approaches like high passing, sidechain high passing, what you said, right? And also an array of maximizers, and also an array of EQs for coloring. Let's say you love the brightness on a few EQs, so you gotta know, okay, this mix is super dull. I will grab that EQ and I will boost with one knob, it will give me the exact brightness I'm searching for. Speaking of EQs, probably you have your own favorite, like frequencies, approaches. I would love to hear from you.
For me, in terms of mastering, I don't do a ton. If I have to do a ton, I'll just go back to the mix, as you say, which goes back to the whole stem mixing thing, the difference between having access to the stems or not having access to the stems. But there's you can do a lot in mastering. You can do a lot in mastering even if you just have a single stereo track with something like you talked about multiband compression, how you'll use that in certain ways. And there's so much stuff that you can do with side chaining or expansion, multiband expansion on a master. You can do some amazing stuff. And like one thing I used to do when I was mixing a lot of rap and trap and EDM related genres is if you get sent a song to master and you just absolutely, the kick is just dead, completely dead. There's not enough snap at all. Whereas in EDM, a lot of the time you want a really snappy kick. What I do sometimes is I have certain samples that I've made which are just attack. So like certain samples I've just cut, so it's literally just a tiny sound. And then just go through on the master. So I've got the master and then go through and trigger every single kick drum, just layer in this sound and just blend it in underneath. There's stuff like that you can do. So there are still things that you can do.
Can you imagine a classic mastering engineer with, let's say, like, he doesn't even use a screen in front of him.
Yeah.
Because he's like, I'm just master. I will run your stuff through the outboard gear. All the mastering will be done in analog. It will be completely useless when you have to solve a problem like that.
Well, digital has changed a lot of stuff. Like something like Pro MB is my favorite plugin of all time. I've joked before with people of doing a course just on mixing a whole song with just something like Pro MB. As everything, because something like Pro MB, you can use it as an EQ, you can use it as a compressor, you can use it as a multiband compressor, you can use it as
a sidechain tool.
You can sidechain it. You can do frequency specific sidechains within it. You can. There's just so much stuff you can do. Multiband expansion. You can do so much stuff within something like Pro MB. So there is still a lot of stuff that you can do. But
one of the cool tricks. I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, go ahead.
Just memorized that just a couple of days ago. A band wanted me to. I'm sorry for the off topic. They wanted, like, the hat was super present, and it was a good drummer, very consistent drummer. So the hi-hat was bright. He used big crashes, like large 19, 18-inch crashes that were sounding very dark, and I couldn't really bring them up without bringing even higher the balance of the hi-hat in the overheads. So what I did, I used the Pro MB, and on the higher band, where the hi-hat dwells, that sheen of the hi-hat, like above 9 kilohertz and to the very top of the spectrum. So I sidechained that band from the direct hi-hat signal, from the same high frequency range of the direct hi-hat. And I just made sure that every time the hi-hat plays, it gets ducked like almost 6 dB. And then I boosted that channel, that band 6 dB up. And it solved the overhead problem. All the cymbals went really nice and bright, and I glued them with the room microphones. So that digital tool, it would be really hard to route and to solve any problem. And sometimes you have to solve problems like that during stem mastering. And another little tool I'd love to recommend to everyone, especially when you're mastering a lot, I think it's definitely from the same guys who made Soothe. Yeah. I keep forgetting the name.
Spiff.
I'm using
Spiff?
Yeah, exactly.
Oak
Spiff.
Sound.
I remember Spiff, but I don't remember Oak Sound,
Oak
right?
Sound, yeah.
Yeah, somehow I just I remember sound, but I forget Oak. So Spiff is fantastic because it's not just a transient shaper, but it really analyzes the input signal, and you can boost the perception without really ruining the balance. You can boost the perception of the kick drum or the snare snappiness, or maybe the woody mid-range of the drum kit. You can do a lot of things with that. So I can really recommend Spiff more than Soothe. I know some people love Soothe. I just keep only in rare cases when I need to save something super harsh and lo-fi, I'm using Soothe.
Yeah.
In most cases, I somehow just get away with the regular EQ.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think we've talked about it very slightly in one of our things. Yeah, something like Soothe it's a bit too automatic for me. My brain, my brain just doesn't feel comfortable doing it. That level of like automatic processing where I'm not making the decisions exactly myself. Just I'd rather open up an EQ and do some crazy surgical EQ simply because I'm making the final decision rather than leaving it up to a threshold or whatever. But it's a great plugin. I mean, I have used it in the past.
It's an awesome plugin. It saved me with a recent project. I had a band and they had a great session drummer, but I don't know what they used for the hi-hat and for the overheads, but the microphone sounded really, really bad. I mean, only resonances. Super teeny, super bright, super like 4 kilohertz, then 5 kilohertz, then 6 point something, and all just, a forest of resonances.
Yep.
And I could do nothing with EQ that pleased me, but then I just slapped the Soothe and I brought it almost all the way up. No one uses it to the extreme. I just use it to the extreme. And all of a sudden it sounded like a smooth, nice sounding hi-hat. And then I drenched it into the room reverb, into short room reverb. And it sounded great. I didn't even expect that. So sometimes it's cool to abuse a plugin. And I know it's an off topic. It's nothing to do about mastering, because during the mastering, you almost never use tools to the extreme, but it's good to break the rules sometimes. That's what you told about manually not replacing, but adding the kick samples to the hip hop track.
Yeah, I mean, and
somehow that's still mastering.
It's the kind of thing that you'd fix extremely easily if you just sent me the actual stems, or you just told the guy to, can you just, I don't know, make the kick brighter or add some more snap to the kick, whatever. But it's just this kind of thing where in mastering, sometimes you have to just do really creative, weird things just to get the result. Like, you have to do some weird side chaining and side chain that frequency to that and make sure that, and every time the hi-hat that hits, that expands and whatever. There are weird things that you can do. It's just the limits are very kind of narrow of how far you can push those crazy things before you start hearing it on the whole mix. Because it's mastering, you've got a single stereo track. If you're just doing one very specific kind of dynamic move to the hi-hat, you are going to hear it on the guitars or the vocals, even if you do it in such a way that it's tiny and kind of unnoticeable. It's still there. It's not perfect.
And
it's not the ideal way.
Really.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, if you can just send a little revision list to the mix engineer, and so unless there's no access to the mix, then it's better to just apply those things in the mix.
Yeah.
And when there is no access, and yet another tool I love using, for example, and that's probably a good example, for example, with live mixes. For instance, recently Jinjer wanted me to master their Wacken performance, and they only had the front of house mix, or maybe, I don't know why, but most of the official Wacken mixes are so bad. I'm sorry for saying that, but only the official band mixes, when they record their own multi-track and they mix their own stuff, they sound good. But when it's something official, it always sounds really, really bad. And the amount of things I had to do to save it, to make it at least listenable, were crazy. So I had no access to the multi-track.
There's just a stereo out from the desk. Yeah,
and it was already compressed to death. And I don't know what they were using, but all the attacks were gone, a lot of reverb, So there's only so much you can do with that. But that's what I wanted to say. You have things like isotope master rebalance, for example, that brings up or down the drums or vocals or bass. Yeah, and there are lots of tools like that right now, AI-driven tools that remove ambience from the vocals, for instance, or make the vocals louder compared to the room ambience or the background noise. You can use that when you're mixing live music, but for mastering live music, when you have a stereo stem, Isotope Mastery Balance is a tool for me because I don't have to think too much. I just slap it on the track and I just, move the fader around until I'm happy. And then I'll probably bounce it. Another cool thing, so I guess it would be cool to tell more tips and tricks while I have them in my mind.
No, go ahead.
Another cool thing I like doing is sometimes when you have problems with articulation, some de-essers would understand. So let's say I'm using mastery balance. I'm removing everything but the vocals as much as I can. Then on this vocal track, I will put a de-esser and I will activate sibilance listen so that it will only play me the sibilance.
Yeah, just solo.
And I will render the sibilance on the separate track.
Oh yeah.
And then I will have a sibilant track that I can even edit. I will remove the unneeded sibilance and I will probably level to the same loudness by using a drum leveler with the knob set all the way to 100%. So I'll have this completely static, super controlled sibilance track.
Yeah.
And by adding those to the master track or to the overly de-essed vocal track in the mixing situation.
So you're essing rather than de-essing.
Yeah. So I will do the essing. And by using spiff, I can do, or by using master rebalance and then spiff, I can get the drum transients track. I can use SmartGate. That's another cool plugin. And I'm sorry, I forgot the manufacturer also, but it's an amazing plugin. Since I bought it, my stem mastering has gone to another level. So sometimes you send me a drum track for the stem mastering, and you do not send me the separate kick, but I don't even ask you for it because I just slap the SmartGate, I select kick, it listens for a couple of seconds, and then it gives me the separated kick. I render it to a separate track, and then I can control the amount of additional kick. I can also do a few things with that kick that will not really mess with the phase because you got to make sure that the phase is correct. Otherwise, you will just get some weird frequency issues. But things like a little bell curve on that, or a little transient, or a little transient shaper, or a little compressor, or a bit of distortion that will not mess the phase, will really give me a lot of freedom while mastering to bring up the drum transients or vocal sibilance and therefore articulation or things like that. And vice versa, I can bring certain elements back in the mix. Again, it's not about the studio situation where you can ask the client to fix things. That will be always better than doing all those tricks.
Yeah.
But the more we are diving into the AI world, the more plugins we'll have that will magically fix those things.
Separate things and allow you to tweak things without ruining other things, like...
Again, it will just make it a bit more mixing than mastering.
Yeah.
So I'm just doing more mixing.
Yeah. But the thing is, I find it incredibly fun when you have like the exact situation you're saying, where you have like a stereo out that has already been mixed by someone, by a random, you don't know who mixed it. Some random guy mixed it on the day on the desk. You don't know how much effort was put into it or whatever. No offense to any live mixers, but you just got a stereo mix and you just like, this is all you've got, make it work. And that's just so much fun for me. Like you're talking about, you have to S the vocals, like... Yeah. You have I've had it in the past with people that have a bit of a lisp when they're singing, and you have to actually S them rather than de-S them.
Exactly.
Or you have to figure out interesting, unique ways of changing that balance, and you have to use AI, or you have to use something like Isotope RX or whatever, the music rebalance, master rebalance thing, and it's a lot of fun. It's stupid, but it's a lot of fun. And the thing is, while it may not be perfect, the band or the person you're working with they can hear this massive difference that you've managed to make, even with the extremely limited resources, and they can be like, wow, how the heck did you even do that with what you were given? And that's a very satisfying thing, like I've as I say, like with the stuff like blending in a click sample, like a snap sample or whatever, her kick and stuff. And they're just like, how did you do that? I didn't even get that. My original kick didn't even have that kind of an attack. How did you make it have that kind of an attack?
Especially with the kick, man.
It's a different kick, you know? It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Being limited that way.
Yeah, that's the magic of blending. Proper blending that you described makes things sound 10 times louder, although it's just a tiny, tiny little click. Yeah. So, and again, with mastering, it's important, I think the same as with mixing. With mastering, it's important to have a set of approaches that will instantly fix the basic problems, like, okay, flabby low end, high pass, maybe reinforce it later, multiband, a set of cool sounding high frequency boosts that you like, some pull tech emulation, I like plugin alliance AMEC 200 for high frequency boost, then maybe something else, maybe some sort of an exciter for extreme situations, then a set of maximizers to approach each case, because sometimes you'll have too much transients, sometimes you'll have not enough transients, sometimes you have a low end rich song, sometimes you'll have a dry sounding song. So there's that. Basic and repetitive approaches that always work.
Yeah.
And then you'll have a creative side of things that will be problem solving.
That's the important thing. It's the thing of like, it would be wrong to say always use these specific things on these specific settings. I know a lot of people look for that. They want to like, okay, what setting should I use on my master bus compressor? How high up should I set my sidechain low pass, low cut on high pass / low cut on my SSL bus compressor? You know, should I use auto release or should I use fast release? You know, should I use? How much should I clip or how much should I limit? No, it's not about a specific thing. It's about reacting to what you're given, because every single mix you receive is going to be completely different, you know?
Exactly.
And
in mastering. Because as a mixer, you have certain, you know yourself. But as a mastering engineer, you have no idea what you'll get. Yeah.
So you need to know the tools and know the techniques, and there are that you don't necessarily have to always use. Like you said something earlier about you don't necessarily have to use EQ to fix a problem. You know, like you can, if you want your mix to be slightly bigger, even if you just put a pull tech on the master, that will boost low end, even with nothing on. Just the nature of a lot of pull techs, they boost low end. You know, so
exactly.
I know that like. If you see like CLA on his mix bus, he uses a pull tech and he uses a big boost, but even without that boost, you're getting a bit of a boost. Or if you put a tape machine emulation with specific types of tape, you have to experiment between the kind of tape and the kind of sound you're going for. But that can give you a nice low end boost, you know. Or
exactly.
if you put
when you're hearing, when you're hearing the unmastered song, you want to first think, okay, I want more low end, or do I want more punch from the kick? If I want more punch from the kick, maybe instead of boosting the low end, I want to put a spiff instead of spiff and only trigger it to react to the low end.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe my low end will be just enough to hit that multiband I was talking about before. And so on. So instantly you got to hear, okay, is the singer too bright or is the singer too sibilant? Because if the singer is too sibilant, it will be one scenario for you.
Yep.
It's too bright, another scenario.
Yeah. No, exactly. Like you gotta. It's not very helpful, I think, for a lot of people, but it is actually helpful. They think it's not helpful when I just want, give me the settings, tell me the settings. No, like
we did.
There are tons of different tricks. We've mentioned a lot of different tricks, but you have to just kind of learn them and then use the specific ones that will work best for your particular scenario. So I think we've come close to nearly an hour of talking here. Just finally, let's talk a tiny bit, maybe 10 minutes, about clipping versus limiting, because this is a huge topic, obviously, in mixing as well and in mastering. How do you use clipping versus limiting? Because I have a lot of opinions on this as well. So
in mastering, it depends, again, on the material. I would probably say that if I see and here, but I usually use a very specific plugin, Smaxoscope. Use it I've been using it for probably 15 or 17 years. And what I see usually helps me analyze what I hear and vice versa. When there is a very specific high frequency transient content in the mix, I will first clip it a little bit. And it depends on what character of the resulting transients I want to get. If I want them to be super precise and super snappy, I will probably clip more, and I will use a maximizer later to finish the job of making things loud enough. So another 2-3 dB will be done by Isotope or Pro L2, while Clipper does most of the transient shaping. But what it does not do, it does not react to the kick drum. It doesn't react to the toms, probably, depending on the toms again. It's important to understand that when some, and you don't want bass guitar or vocals reach that clipper threshold, obviously. But it's important to understand that every source element, like the kick drum or the tom drum that has lots of low end, also has lots of treble. So when you see the pick reaching the clipper, if it's super bright kick, even if it's super subby, but it has a lot of click, probably that click is what reaches the threshold. If you just shave off all the treble and you see no more reaction from the clipper, it means that only the treble is reaching the clipper. I'm sorry for being a little confusing, but that's the good thing of visualizing together with hearing. You know for sure what's going on with your processing. So for me, when I'm mastering and I have a really snappy snare drum, I will first shave it off with a clipper, and then I will use the maximizer. Now, sometimes after I done the clipping and maximizing, I will turn the clipper off and I will make sure that I hear the negative difference. If I hear nothing, I will probably remove the clipper. Sometimes that happens with Ozone because I really like the algorithm of Ozone. So another thing with clipper, I guess, is sometimes, very rarely, you want the effect, the audible effect of clipper, especially when playing with the soft clipping knob. Because soft clipping will be like soft knee on the compressor. It will start reacting to the quieter signals, and the louder the signal is, the more it reacts. So with that kind of clipping, it's no more surgical. It's not a scalpel anymore. It's a tool in its own, and you're using it artistically to create a certain flavor of your master. But with modern recordings, I've noticed that you don't want that.
Yeah.
You only want that when you're reaching for some indie, dirty master. You want that master to sound as if it was mastered in the 90s, let's say.
Yeah. I think the biggest issue with clipping is that people just simply don't understand it. Like the amount of times you see people online with like, and they've put like something like JST clip, which is very good, of course, but like they've got a kick drum or a vocal and they've put JST clip on it and they've boosted it by 3 dB and they're saying, oh, it sounds so much better. And it's like, I can see on the meter where your vocal actually is in terms of loudness. You're not even actually getting into the clipping. You've just boosted it by 3 dB and they think it sounds better. I think a lot of the time in mixing and mastering, people just don't understand what a clipper is doing. And even when they do actually get into clipping, they don't know what they're hearing. They don't know what they're listening for. So as long as you...
That's a very important thing.
You need to know what you're listening for.
Yeah. But that's a very important thing to stress upon. First off, when you're doing such things as master clipping, you got to make sure that your input and output are in sync. You don't want to fool yourself into thinking you're doing something that sounds better because it's louder.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why I don't really like using tape stuff. When I'm using tape, I make sure that what I hear is not, oh wow, it sounds more exciting, but I want to hear the action of the tape. I want to hear it saturating. Otherwise, most likely, I had that negative experience with slate tape. it just you put it on the track, and you have to manually adjust the knob, like -1 dB.
It does turn it up by like 1 dB, as you say.
Yeah, and you cannot really link them together so that the output knob is always 1 dB quieter. To each time you move the input knob, it will ruin the balance for you, and that's the worst thing you can do with mastering, in my opinion. And in general, you got to know what the thing is doing, and when it boosts. So that's why I'm not using GST Clipper, although I know many people do, and it's a good plugin. Yes, but with Clipper, especially on the snare, I just need to shave off the transient.
Yeah. It's fine if you know what you're doing. If you know what you're doing and you know that, okay, I'm not actually going to start clipping until I boost past 5. If you know that, then it's fine. But if you're just like sticking it on there and you're just turning it up.
Yeah, and that's the problem, because it just boosts. And people think that by turning the knob, they are improving the sound while they're just making the sound louder. I just had to make this disclaimer not to bash any given plugin, neither Slate's tape, because I know many people love it and knowingly use it, and of course not Joey's Clipper, because it's a very popular plugin.
It's a good clipper. It's just that it doesn't have meters, so...
Exactly. So the perfect clipper, especially for mastering, especially when you're using it as a tool to tame the transients, the perfect clipper shouldn't be audible at all.
Yeah. That's another thing. Like the thing is, with a decent mix, you can clip a good mix by like 2 or 3 dBs, and you're not really going to hear a huge difference for that first 2 or 3, because most of the time it's that super high end frequency, super sharp stuff, as you said, that's just getting shaved off, which isn't that important anyway. It's once you start clipping 3, 4, 5 dB, then you'll start hearing the difference, and you might start hearing the kick distort a little bit, which could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing depending on what you want. You might start hearing the vocal distort on some very loud notes, which you might not want. But it's just about understanding the tool. If you understand how it works, if you understand how hard you need to be going in it, and you understand how the metering works and how you need to be balancing your input and your output, so you're actually hearing the difference and not just hearing a volume difference, then it's a great tool. And like the as you say, I'd use it very similarly to how you use it, where I'd probably do a clip off, shave off some 2 or 3 dBs or more, depending on what I want. Basically, just it's the thing we talked about at the very start. Just what is the whole purpose of mastering for us? It is to yes, we want the master to be louder than just a mix. We want it to be louder. We don't want it to be loud just for the sake of loudness. We want it to be louder. We want it to be more cohesive. Maybe you can get some glue from mastering, but we want those positive things. We don't want any of the negative things. Or it's a balance as well. You might want to try and hit a certain level of loudness where you have an acceptable level of negative things, which isn't that bad, and it's worth it for that bit of extra loudness or glue or whatever you get. So basically, just
exactly. You only stop when you start. You only stop when you start hearing bad things happening. Yeah. So and then depending on what the client wants, you either go a little bit further, just a tiny bit further, because you know that you'll probably hear you've done all those things. Yeah. You're in an analytical state of mind. That's why you hear things so sharply. You're moving the knob and you hear, oh, it's ruining. I'm gonna stop. You'll probably have another half a dB before the client or another engineer would hear things, right? Mm-hmm. But at the same time, do you really need it? I say the difference in between -6 LUFS and -5 LUFS isn't that big to sacrifice some noticeable quality in the dynamics of the low end.
Yeah. But the thing is, because of the fact that you're doing it to the limit of where you think it still sounds pristine and good anyway, you do have that little wiggle room. If someone does say, oh, I want it louder, it's not going to completely ruin it, because you're still doing everything within those limits. So, but yeah.
Exactly.
As you say, like clipping a little bit, and the purpose of the clipping is to just like, there are certain high frequency things or things that we don't really hear. You can clip 2 or 3 dBs and it's not going to make a huge difference. Then maybe you can push it a little bit more and you will hear a slight difference in maybe the kick or whatever. but it won't sound bad. It might sound good, you know? And then once you're done with that, top it off with a limiter. And because you've already done the clipping, you don't need to limit 5, 6, 7 dBs. You might just be able to limit 2 or 3 dBs, get a tiny bit more of that glue, you know, for the whole mix, where the whole mix sounds more cohesive. But you're because of the fact that you've done most of the heavy lifting with the clipper, you're no longer going to get that distortion from the limiter, from the release of the limiter, for example, because it's not having to go 5 dB, 5 dB. It's just doing 2 dB, 3 dB, whatever. And like the combination is you've made your mix loud enough at the end of the day. And who cares? Who cares really if it sounds really good?
Yeah, you mentioned... we mentioned the word distortion a few times in context of the limiter and the clipper, and it might be important to explain that those are two types of distortions. Both are unwanted, but they sound differently, and we're balancing two. So instead of getting all the distortion from the clipper or all the distortion from the maximizer, we're trying to get as little distortion from the both. And in general, and I heard it back in the day in the Andy forum, we were talking with Ermin, who is a huge figure in metal mastering.
Yeah.
We were talking that a great mix will be probably can be mastered with only with the clipper.
Yeah.
So if the mix is perfectly balanced, you can just use a clipper and you will get almost 100% of the loudness without any problem. So the clipper is also a great test tool for a mixer. If you can master your mix with just a clipper, maybe 90% of the loudness with just a clipper, it means you have great balances, your low end is under control, everything sounds right, your vocals are not moving around dynamics-wise, everything is probably right in your mix.
Yeah.
So there's that.
So that's you've come to the end of the mastering chain now, which is the clipper and the limiter, and I think that kind of brings us to the end of this mastering discussion as well. We've come to the end of our chain.
Yeah, we won't talk about dithering.
Oh no, I mean the simple thing is, I don't care.
I just slap 16-bit or 24-bit in a zone, and I make sure I put auto blank on so that it doesn't hiss, because I know some clients who listen to my masters so loud they hear the dithering hiss in 16 bits. Mm-hmm. So that's it.
Yeah, I mean that's about as far as I go in terms of caring. Like once it
sorry for scaring you with the dithering.
No, it's all good. Like there were times where I would have cared and I would have done tons of different things, but like I don't care. As long as it's loud and all that, you're not going to hear most of that stuff anyway. So don't worry about it too much. Yeah. In
this context, I cannot hear dithering.
Yeah. Anyway, so I think that's a good place to end it. That was a good chat.
Agree, yeah.
I enjoyed it. I mean, as we say, just very finally, it's difficult to give exact settings. You can't say, always master to -14. -14 LUFS, I'm not sure if they still say that, but that's what they said for years on Spotify. Like, what the heck is -14? That's like, you get that before you've even put the limiter on the mix, it's going to be at -14. So look, at the end of the day, what Max told me years ago, just master to where it sounds good. Mm-hmm. And do whatever it takes to get that. End of story. Yeah. Awesome. So great talking with you, Max, as always.
Likewise. It's been a lot of fun, yeah.
Awesome. Until next time then. See you, mate.
Yeah. See
Bye.
you.